For years, ECOWAS maintained a hard line against Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Sanctions were imposed. Borders were closed. Military intervention was openly discussed after the coup in Niger. At the time, many observers believed the pressure would isolate the Sahel governments and eventually force them back into the regional order that had existed for decades. But today, the tone sounds very different. Now, senior figures connected to ECOWAS are speaking about model cooperation with the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES. Instead of threats, the language has shifted toward dialogue, stability, geography, and regional coordination. That sudden change is raising serious questions across West Africa. What exactly changed? The answer may lie in the rapid transformation of the regional balance of power. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger did not collapse under pressure. Instead, they moved closer together. The three countries strengthened military coordination, expanded political cooperation, and began presenting themselves as a united Sahel bloc rather than isolated governments facing separate crises. At the center of this shift stands Captain Ibrahim Traore. For many people across French-speaking Africa, Traore has become more than the leader of Burkina Faso. He now represents a wider movement centered on sovereignty, regional self-reliance, and the belief that African countries should play a larger role in managing their own security challenges. At the same time, caution remains strong across the Sahel. Many still remember the sanctions, the diplomatic pressure, and the threats that came from ECOWAS during the earlier confrontations. Because of that history, some observers believe the softer language may not necessarily mean full trust or reconciliation. In this analysis, we will examine why ECOWAS changed its tone, how AES altered the political landscape of West Africa, the growing influence of Ibrahim Traore, and why this debate is becoming much larger than Burkina Faso alone. The change in ECOWAS rhetoric did not happen because the organization suddenly abandoned its previous position. The shift happened because the political reality in West Africa changed faster than many regional leaders expected. When Niger experienced its military takeover, ECOWAS responded with one of the strongest reactions in its history. Economic sanctions were introduced, borders were restricted, there were even discussions about the possibility of military intervention. The goal was clear. ECOWAS wanted to demonstrate that unconstitutional changes of power would not be tolerated inside the region. However, the outcome was very different from what many expected. Instead of breaking apart under pressure, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger moved closer together. The three governments openly supported one another and eventually formalized their partnership through the Alliance of Sahel States. What began as a political response slowly evolved into a broader strategic bloc with military, diplomatic, and regional ambitions. This created a serious dilemma for ECOWAS. Geography alone makes complete isolation almost impossible. The Sahel remains deeply connected to the rest of West Africa through trade routes, migration flows, security operations, and cross-border communities. Millions of ordinary people depend on movement between these countries for work, agriculture, and family survival. Security concerns also played a major role in the changing tone. Armed extremist groups continue operating across borders throughout the Sahel. If communication between AES countries and ECOWAS members completely collapsed, coordination against these groups could become even weaker. That risk affects not only Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, but also coastal countries such as Benin, Togo, and Ghana. As a result, some leaders inside ECOWAS appear to have accepted a difficult reality. AES is no longer a temporary political reaction. It is becoming a permanent regional structure that cannot simply be ignored or pressured out of existence. This explains why recent language coming from ECOWAS has become more pragmatic. The focus is gradually shifting away from confrontation and toward managing coexistence with a new political reality emerging in the Sahel. AES is no longer viewed as a temporary alliance created only to respond to sanctions or diplomatic pressure. Across West Africa, it is increasingly being seen as a strategic bloc capable of reshaping the political and security landscape of the entire Sahel region. One reason is geography. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger together form a massive land corridor stretching across the center of the Sahel. The three countries control important trade routes and occupy territory that directly connects North Africa to coastal West Africa. This geographic position gives AES strategic importance that ECOWAS cannot simply ignore. The alliance also sits on significant natural resources. Niger possesses major uranium reserves. Burkina Faso and Mali are important gold producers. While these resources alone do not guarantee economic power, they increase the long-term importance of the region in global strategic calculations. But the most important factor may be security. For years, extremist violence spread across the Sahel despite multiple international military operations and foreign partnerships. Armed groups moved across borders faster than national armies could respond. This created a growing belief inside Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger that isolated national strategies were no longer enough. AES emerged partly as a response to that problem. The three governments began increasing military coordination, sharing intelligence, and discussing joint operations against extremist groups operating throughout the region. Instead of treating security as separate national issues, AES started promoting the idea of a common Sahel defense space. This shift carries major consequences for West Africa. If instability in the Sahel continues, neighboring coastal countries could face rising security pressure, increased migration, disrupted trade routes, and greater regional instability. In other words, what happens inside AES no longer affects only the three member states. Ordinary civilians are also directly connected to this reality. Farmers, traders, transport workers, and families depend on open movement across borders for their daily survival. This is one reason why complete political separation between AES and ECOWAS would create serious, long-term risks for the wider region. For ECOWAS, the message is becoming increasingly clear. AES is evolving into a political and security structure with enough regional weight to influence the future direction of West Africa itself. Much of the changing political atmosphere in West Africa cannot be understood without examining the growing influence of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Across French-speaking Africa, Traore has become one of the most recognized political figures in the Sahel. His image is now closely associated with sovereignty, regional self-reliance, and the idea that African nations should exercise greater control over their own security decisions. What makes this significant is not only his military background or public speeches, it is the symbolic role he has gradually come to represent across the region. For years, frustration increased throughout parts of the Sahel because of insecurity, economic hardship, and the belief that foreign-backed strategies were not producing lasting stability. Traoré entered this environment promoting a message centered on African-led security policies, regional cooperation, and reduced dependence on outside powers. That message quickly gained attention far beyond Burkina Faso. At the same time, Traoré did not present Burkina Faso as isolated from its neighbors. Instead, he repeatedly emphasized cooperation with Mali and Niger. Under his leadership, AES slowly evolved from a diplomatic response into a broader political and security partnership. This development changed the calculations inside ECOWAS. In the past, pressure directed at one government could remain limited to a single country. But AES created a different situation. Burkina Faso was no longer standing alone. Support from Mali and Niger increased the alliance's political resilience and reduced the impact of external pressure. Traoré's growing popularity also created another challenge for ECOWAS. In many parts of West Africa, he is now viewed as a symbol of strategic independence and African self-determination. Because of this, prolonged confrontation with Burkina Faso could risk increasing anti-ECOWAS sentiment among parts of the regional population. Still, serious challenges remain. Burkina Faso continues facing security threats and economic pressure. In the long term, the durability of Traoré's influence may depend on whether AES can transform political momentum into real improvements in security and daily life. The rise of AES has also triggered concern among several Western governments and international organizations. Much of that concern centers on security, regional stability, and the long-term political direction of the Sahel. Some Western officials argue that reduced military cooperation with traditional partners could weaken counter-terrorism efforts in the short term. Others worry that growing instability between AES and ECOWAS could disrupt trade routes, increase migration pressure, and complicate regional coordination against armed extremist groups. There are also concerns about the political model emerging inside the Sahel. Western governments frequently emphasize constitutional transitions, civilian governance, and institutional stability. Because of this, the growing influence of military-led governments in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger continues to generate criticism abroad. At the same time, many people inside the Sahel offer a different perspective. A common argument heard across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is that previous security arrangements also failed to stop the expansion of extremist violence. After years of foreign military operations and international partnerships, insecurity continued spreading across large parts of the region. Because of this, many citizens believe their countries have the right to pursue a different security strategy. Supporters of AES also reject the idea that the alliance means complete isolation from the world. The three countries continue seeking international partnerships while trying to build greater strategic independence and stronger regional coordination. The broader lesson for Africa may be larger than the conflict itself. Many countries across the continent are now watching the Sahel carefully. The central question is no longer simply about ECOWAS or AES. It is about whether African states can strengthen sovereignty while still maintaining stability, economic cooperation, and effective regional partnerships. In the end, the future of AES will likely depend not only on political symbolism, but on its ability to improve security, strengthen institutions, and deliver practical results for ordinary people across the Sahel.